Hello, welcome, members of the public and esteemed task force members, to day 2 of the California Reparations Task Force March hearing. I'll start the meeting by sharing some remarks. So in December 2013, the UN General Assembly adopted Resolution 68-237, by which it proclaimed 2015 to 2024 to be the International Decade for People of African Descent, with the theme People of African Descent, Recognition, Justice, and Development. Yesterday, the California Reparations Task Force voted on the community of eligibility to be defined by lineage as characterized as an African American descendant of chattel slaves or a free Black person living in the United States prior to the 19th century. I believe that the task force made the right decision in alignment with the International Decade for People of African Descent, and that we reaffirmed the human right to self-determination, particularly for descendants of free and enslaved Black people in the United States. And I hope that the decision that we made today sparks a global reparatory justice movement for people of African descent. So now I'll turn to the next item on the agenda, which is a public comment period. Ms. Aisha Martin. Oh, yes.
Madam Chair, I will need to establish a quorum by calling the roll.
Parliamentarian Johnson, please establish the quorum, please.
Thank you. Good morning, task force members. I will begin by starting with the chair. Chair Moore.
Present.
Vice Chair Brown.
Present.
Member Bradford.
Here.
Member Grills.
Present.
Member Holder.
Present.
Member Jones Sawyer. Member Lewis.
Here.
Member Tamaki.
Here.
Member Montgomery Stepp.
Here.
Thank
Here.
you.
Jones Sawyer's here.
Thank you, members Jones Sawyer. Madam Chair, there are 9 members of the AB 3121 task force. 5 members are necessary to establish a quorum, and there are 9 members present. A quorum is established.
Thank you, Parliamentarian Johnson. Now to Ms. Aisha Martin Walton for public comment.
Good morning. Good morning, Chair Moore, task force members, and members of the public. My name is Aisha Martin Walton, and I am with the Department of Justice, and the task force would like to hear your public comments today. The public comment period will be for 1 hour, and each person will have 3 minutes. Please be advised that in fairness to everyone, at the 3-minute mark, you may be politely interrupted and your microphone turned off. However, please know that there is a public comment period during each meeting, and the task force encourages everyone to participate. You may also submit written comments to the task force members at any time via email at reparationstaskforce@doj.ca.gov. To participate in public comment this morning, please use the raise hand function. Locate the button in the upper right-hand side of the screen. On the sidebar, you will see the shape of a hand. Click on the hand to prompt the raised hand feature. On our end, we will accept your raised hand. Then you will see a notification at the top of your screen to continue. You'll have to click the continue button. You will then be elevated into the meeting as a presenter and automatically muted until it is your turn to speak. Note that there's a 20-second delay between the attendee and presenter mode, so keep that in mind as you're being promoted. At the conclusion of your comments, you will be muted and again returned back to the attendee level. We will accept the raise hand feature as they come in, and once the person in front of you is done, Trini Hurtado, who is also with DOJ, will say your name and prompt that you may begin speaking. At that point, you may also have the option to turn on your camera. So with that, good morning, and Trini, let's have our first commenter.
Good morning, everyone. The first commenter this morning will be Raphael. Raphael, you've been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes to speak.
Good morning.
Yes.
Oh, great. Good morning, Chair Moore, Vice Chair Brown, and task force members. I thank you for your vote on community eligibility yesterday. My husband, Joe, and I were on with you for the entire day. Joe was able to speak, but unfortunately, I was never promoted to share my prepared speech. I'd like to share those words with you today and hope that they help your body with future deliberations. I am Raphael, daughter of Hetty, granddaughter of Hilda, great-granddaughter of Lavinia. That's as far back as I can trace. We are descendants of enslaved Black people in America. While traveling to Ghana with the NAACP on the 400th anniversary of the 1619 arrival of the first enslaved people, I learned through African ancestry that my lineage is with the Tikar people of Cameroon. Despite this revelation, I appreciate that my experiences and memories are with my people from Chicago, Illinois, via the Great Migration from Greenville, Mississippi. We are Black Americans. As Secretary Weber shared, I too can visit African nations, Ghana, Benin, Togo, and soon Cameroon, but I visit as a tourist. My home and that of my forebears is the U.S. I take my citizenship and my right to vote seriously. I was birthed from a Black womb, born in the Negro ward at Cook County Hospital in Chicago. Yes, my original birth certificate says Negro, where subsequent copies have removed the title. I am the first in my family to be born with the full rights of citizenship and the ability as a Black woman to vote. I vote every time, for president, midterms, or for a local traffic light. I thank you for your vote for lineage-based reparations, and I ask that you consider my comments as you make further deliberations. I am not a person of color. My experience with racism and those of my forebears differ wildly from others in this newly created category. My people did not come here voluntarily or undocumented. They were violently attacked, kidnapped, documented on manifests as cargo, and forced into bondage, peonage, sharecropping, and existed under Jim Crow. They lived through horrors that are not accurately named or acknowledged. All Black people likely deal with the systemic vestiges of racism in the U.S., but descendants do not have a country to return to. The U.S. is home. The data on Black people should be disaggregated. Freedmen are uniquely burdened with the traumatic memories and legacy of chattel slavery, suffer with voids of familial information, and have little hope for parity. Reparations are necessary for these ills to be repaired, and I am enormously grateful that we are on the path towards repair. Cases of U.S. reparations have used specific designations. For the Japanese that were interned, Asians was not used, despite the fact that Chinese and Koreans may have experienced racism. I believe these efforts towards reparations will address much of the racism and inequity that we face as Black Americans, and thereby all Americans. My ancestors, Hetty, Hilda, and Lavinia, are with me today, along with my children and my grandchildren, and we thank you for your future efforts.
Thank you, Ms. Raphael, for your comments this morning. Trini,
Our next speaker is Angela Nirvana. You've been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you. I never dreamed our first fight for reparations would be against our own people. It is exhausting given the heinous chattel slavery our ancestors endured building the U.S. economy, a Holocaust we are still enduring, compliments of our government at every branch. For those of you who opted for race-based reparations for Black immigrants who chose to migrate to this racist country, who per the data by scholars are far more wealthy than freedmen, I didn't just make those numbers up, Dr. Grills. Dr. Darity contributed to the 2016 Color of Wealth LA report, which shows Africans' total assets were $152,000 to U.S. Black $30,000, and their median income was $115,000 to our $53,500. I doubt, given the data, that Black immigrants proportionately suffer from the highest rates of state-sanctioned executions by the race soldiers of unarmed Black men, women, and children, medical apartheid, incarceration of nonviolent offenders, abortion, single motherhood, children in foster care, detention centers, the preschool to prison pipeline, homelessness, redlining, living in environmentally racist communities and tenement housing that we're now being gentrified out of, unemployment, underemployment, denial of home and business loans, the war on drugs, and now poverty. This is anti-Freedmen racist sentiment that class-based policies nor race-based reparations can fix those of us who are owed everything. Freedmen. In closing, I'd like to give a few flowers. Chair Moore, you have made the ancestors and your people prouder than a peacock. You were grace under fire. I saw them coming for you, sis, and all I can say is God knew who to choose. Dr. Jovan Scott Lewis, you need to give classes on what a true ally is. Thank you for seeing Freedmen's plight with your eyes wide open. Vice Chair Brown, the way you multitask from DC to stand up for our lineage and invoke reason in the exchange on eligibility was well received by my 775 viewers watching live. Senator Bradford, you turned my frown upside down with your yes vote because I was hotter than fish grease when you delayed the vote last month. We wouldn't be in lineage-based reparations had you not stood up and with the voice of our lineage and Dr. Weber's intent. You will be remembered at the polls. Member Step, you're our silent shero. You really came through for the lineage with your yes vote, sis. Contemporary grassroots reparationists all over the country who help us when we sound the alarm, especially CJEC and NASDLA, who do a lot of the heavy lifting. We've come this far because of our collective love for Freedmen. I thank God for each and every.
So sorry to interrupt you. Thank you so much for your comments this morning. All right, next speaker.
Our next speaker is Jonathan Burgess. Mr. Burgess, you've been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes to speak.
Great. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, awesome. Well, members of the task force, I want to thank you for your discord, hard work, and diligence in such a sensitive topic. Senator Bradford, Tamaki, Assembly Member Reggie Jones Sawyer, you guys know what happened in California. And I'm living proof of what California family, foundational families, the systemic national racism that exists. And I was fearful yesterday, almost thinking this was going to go the wrong way. But thanks to Chair Moore, Jovan Scott Lewis, and Reverend Brown, as well as Monica Stepp, for your diligence and understanding what our ancestors needed. I realize that we live in a racist world. And I said this yesterday, we're not going to change racism. We're not. The only way we change is with education. And when we have organizations like the NAACP, because they made a comment, come out and talk about a national movement for everybody, I'm not opposed to it because we all suffer it. But the NAACP did harm to the foundational Black families of California. And it's time that we begin to look and peel the layers back. All these organizations that were involved, and then only then can we repair and fix the systematic structural racism. This was a win for descendants. This was a win for those foundational people, but it was a win for all America and all Black people. I've said this before. If my family and the Monroe family and those other families had been left alone up in those hills, the manufacturing and distribution of foundational Black families helps all Black families, and this world would look different altogether. Grills, you know, and Holder, you both know that contracts given by this state to Black families or foundational Blacks is less than 1%. And for you to think about doing education, which is a fundamental need, that's a slap in the face to our ancestors. And what I will say is this, is when we repair the land that was taken from all the Black families across the United States with the help of the NAACP, will make a difference for all of Black America, including our brothers and sisters from the diaspora. I land my plane. Thank you all. Now the work really starts. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Mr. Burgess. Trini, our next speaker.
The next speaker is going to be Marjorie L. Melvin. You've been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes to speak.
Good morning, Reparations Task Force. I want to say thank you to Chair Camila Moore, to Chair Member Javon Scott Lewis, Chair Member Senator Stephen Bradford, Chair Member Montgomery Stepp, and of course, the renowned and amazing Reverend Amos Brown. Thank you for what you did on yesterday for your vote in favor of lineage-based reparation. I am a resident of the state of California. I am in the 55th district. My assembly person is Philip Chin. My senator is Josh Newman. I know this because I engage with them. I never realized how important it is for us as Californians to be engaged in the political process than I did on yesterday. I realized that we need to have the representatives that we want to see that will advocate for us, like Stephen Bradford did on yesterday, and like the hopefully one day Senator Camila Moore will be. I have not revealed anything, hopefully, that she did not want revealed. But my point is that we need to push and advocate for the type of people we want to see. When I was a little girl growing up in South Los Angeles, I worked for the campaign of Yvonne Brathwaite Burke. Was not really sure of what I was doing or why it was important, but I knew that I wanted to see this woman elevated. And then when I was in my early 20s, I had the opportunity to intern for Congresswoman Maxine Waters in Washington, D.C. But, you know, my parents, despite mom being a teacher in Compton Unified and dad being a cost estimator for Boeing, Rockwell at that time, I couldn't afford it. And that speaks to sometimes the limitations financially that we as Black Americans of U.S. chattel slavery experience. We have the aspirations, but we don't have the financial wherewithal to accomplish what we would like to accomplish. Again, you know what? You guys are taking us to the next level and taking us to a place where we will be made whole. I foresee reparations happening. And again, I want to thank you for your advocacy, Stephen Bradford and Camila Moore, especially because you all will be you are our legislator and will be our future legislator. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Melvin. All right, Trini, we're ready.
Our next speaker is Jesse Paris. You've been unmuted. You now have. Go ahead.
Yes, my name is Jesse Paris, and I am a foundational Black American, and I am urging you to vote in favor of lineage-based reparations. We built this country. We are the first stocks and bonds that were sold on Wall Street. We are the foundation of the United States of America. There would be no United States of America without our blood, sweat, and toil. So with that being said, we have a reparations claim here with the United States government, and it's time the government pay what they owe. This is a debt that's owed. This is not a handout. This is something that is owed, and it's time that they pay it in full. All these other groups, all these other Black groups that are trying to have their hand in our reparations claim, you need to sue your colonizer. So if you were colonized by the British, you need to sue the British. If you were colonized by the Spanish, you need to sue the Spanish. If you were colonized by any of these European nations, you need to sue your colonizer and stay out of our reparations claim. This is our reparations claim. No other group deserves these reparations but foundational Black Americans, American descendants of slavery, the people that built this country. I trace my lineage back to the killing fields of South Carolina. My great grandmother was a sharecropper, so I can trace my lineage back. So it's not that hard to trace one's lineage back to the South, to the killing fields of the South. And it's time that this government pay what they owe. The Biden administration needs to come off with the tangibles. They're giving tangibles to all these other groups, all these immigrant groups, and we aren't getting nothing in return but a slap in the face and some crack pipes. So I urge this council tonight to, or this committee, this board, whatever it is, to pass lineage-based reparations. This is foundational Black Americans reparations claim and nobody else's claim. Thank you for allowing me to speak this morning, and y'all have a blessed rest of the day.
Thank you, Mr. Paris.
The next speaker is Connie Collins. Ms. Collins, you've been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes to speak. Connie Collins. Okay, we'll come back to Connie Collins. The next speaker will be Sister Ella. You've been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes.
Hello, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to speak. I want to say, as a born Californian, born in Linwood, California, and raised in Inglewood, California, yesterday was both a roller coaster and very rewarding at the same time. I want to thank Chair Moore. I want to also thank Montgomery Steppe, Dr. Lewis, and Stephen Bradford, which our family does know. Speaking to my father, Roosevelt Tatum, today, I let him know of what was going on as he watched on yesterday. And I want to represent the Swearington family, the Howard family today, and say that those of us who were forced to possibly move away for education, but also family who is still in Los Angeles County, understands the detriment that this task force has to pass based on lineage, as well as representing Californians who are Native and who have had to move away for better education. It was very disheartening to see those who actually moved away from recognizing the ills of American descendants who still face traumatization of immigration, as well as not having our repair. Growing up in a family as large as mine, over 187 members counted today on Ancestry, back to the fields of James Madison, I understand how much more this committee has to do the work in California, because so goes California, the rest of the state. And I appreciate Bradford finally coming to his senses, and I also appreciate the work that you all did yesterday. Even those who possibly voted against the bill, you are still operating in God's will. And I want to say that right now, this work means so much to us and my family. We are watching, and that we hope that you continue the good work that is meant for American descendants of freedmen and the refugees of free Blacks. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sister Ella.
The next speaker is Robert Kalen Reed. You've been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So after the debacle we experienced yesterday, I wish I could say I'm in a celebratory mood, but I do not have any confidence in the ability of this task force to accomplish the mission set out by Secretary Weber. From secretive rewrites of the bill right before it was signed into legislation to the hesitance to state who the beneficiary class is, I feel like there is subversive action afoot, and I don't trust that there will not be future retaliation along the way. I call for the DOJ to remove Cheryl Grills and Lisa Holder from the task force and install UCLA-trained attorney and co-founder of ADOS, Antonio Moore, who seems to be much more aligned to stated goal of the task force. He's a tweet away at Tone Talks Online. From the ambiguity of the term African American to the numeric 2.6 million, which was a sly way to try and include non-ADOS, I don't understand why the bill simply cannot reflect the language Americans who are descendants of persons enslaved in the U.S. This is simple and clean, non-ambiguous, and the lineage-based program we wanted. That was the reason why grassroots organizers supported the bill in the first place. It includes all descendants of those who were sold into slavery by African slave traders, brought to America as import, but may have received freedom at different points throughout American history. Since the vote has already been made and one towards lineage specificity, I think going back to the second draft version of the bill should be easy, especially since it already exists. I also want to quell this notion that reparations is just a check. Repair is but one aspect of reparations, but a full agenda with policies should run parallel to make repair complete. ADOS must become a protected class to guard against further predation by hostile actors. This includes policy in healthcare, education, government contracting, which is why Holder's plan was insufficient, and even those I can't think of right now. The task force should be thinking of an omnibus bill that addresses multiple facets of ADOS life. To close, if Grills and Holder wants to fight a global reparations fight, I'm not saying they shouldn't. However, this is the wrong platform for such a fight. The fight you want takes cooperation of multiple governments, and the work must be done to build those alliances. ADOS stands in full support of Jamaicans demanding reparations from Britain, Haiti from France, Congo and Burundi from Belgium. Let's unite while not infringing on each other's rights to exist.
Robert Kalin, thank you. Thank you for your comments.
Our next speaker is Jolene Cook. You've been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes.
Thank you, and good morning, Chair Moore and the rest of the task force members. I am a native of Berkeley, California, 4 generations in Berkeley, California, which is extremely rare. But like most of the natives that I know and that were in my generation, we had to move out to explore opportunities in education. I'm a first generation college student, and returning to California last year because of COVID and all of the pressures that I sustained. I was really disheartened because my grandmother's home sold for $1.4 million. Now, even though education does change circumstances, it does not guarantee a sustainable living. And now that I have returned home, so much has changed. My lineage, I can touch. I've experienced here in the Bay Area 4 generations of entrepreneurs, of business owners, and also in doing the research of my family, came across eminent domain who targeted our successful communities and our business owners. So in addition, what I would like now as a returning resident of California and a strong social justice advocate, is a housing right for people of color here, Black people specifically. When I return to my neighborhoods, it's not the community that I grew up with, which was a viable community, one where we helped one another out. For me, returning to Berkeley, I was anxious to try and secure a home in my native ground. And what I would like the council to consider, the task force to consider, is ways to compensate for the damages, for the redlining, for the businesses that have been taken, for all of the people who are suffering. Not, housing is a right. Housing is a right for all of the people who have built this country. And, like I said, I have a postgraduate education. but that education does not guarantee me a sustainable living in my hometown.
Ms. Cook, I'm so sorry to
no.
interrupt you in the middle of your sentence. Thank you so much for your valuable comments this morning.
Our next speaker, I'm going to go ahead and go back to Connie Collins.
Okay.
Ms. Collins, you've been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes. And we cannot hear you. Okay. I am going to the next speaker. The next speaker will be Jonathan. Jonathan, you've been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes to speak.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, indeed. My name is Reverend Jonathan Whitfield, calling out of Atlanta, Georgia. I just want to speak on behalf of my family that is in California, and I want to first thank you guys for voting on a lineage-based reparations claim. That really does mean a lot to the descendants of enslaved people here in this country. That's a very important thing because many of us are speaking out, and many of us across the country are watching this. And as y'all know, the saying goes, as California goes, the rest of the country goes. So this is going to set a nice precedent for the rest of the country. And it means a lot to us, those who are descendants of enslaved people here in this country, that guys continue to do the right thing. And I would really encourage you to really listen at what the people are saying. To really listen to what the people are saying, those who are descendants of that, because that's what's most important. That's what this is about. That is what this is, right and wrong that was done to a certain group of people. You know, as you voted yesterday, and as you continue to move forward in these things, it's important to get this right. It's important to keep the language right. It's important to keep everything on track because these group of people have been doing wrong for so long and not been compensated. So I really want to encourage you guys to really, really take into account what the people are saying and do not try to write the people off as just being over emotional or uneducated, because these people have been dealing with this for centuries in this country, and it's really important to them. And, you know, if California can do this, and then every other state can do this. And you guys are tasked with a great task of really the feelings and the aspiration of millions of Black Americans who are descendants, because you have a lot of weight on your shoulders, and it's important that you really listen to the people, get this right. But I do want to thank the panel for doing this, voting for a lineage-based reparation. That's all it's about. It's about the people who are descendants of those enslaved people here in America. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Reverend. Rini?
Our next speaker will be Carry That Weight. You've been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes to speak.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Lovely. Good morning, guys, gals, and my non-binary pals. I want to first shout out to the ETM media for streaming all the task force meetings. So there's folks here in Blue Jean. There's folks on ETM. Go check them out on YouTube. But special shout outs to Chair Moore, Vice Chair Dr. Brown, Senator Bradford, Councilwoman Montgomery Stepp, Dr. Lewis. Oh, you did your thing yesterday. Thank you for voting for lineage-based reparations. Yesterday was action-packed. There were so many twists and turns, betrayals, side eyes. It was definitely the Super Bowl of legislation, let me tell you that. I want y'all to know that on both sides of my family, both matriarch and patriarch, I hail from lines of people who were enslaved in the U.S., aka American freedmen. My family was sold into slavery. My family was raped, beaten, dehumanized, and bred here on U.S. soil. My family was deemed 3/4 of a human being by the U.S. Constitution. My family was taken by white slave owners from Louisiana to Texas so that their slave owner could go fight in the Civil War. I think we know for which side. And when the Civil War did not go in their favor, they kept my family enslaved past the Emancipation Proclamation. When my family was able to fight to break free from that and begin sharecropping, all they did was were taken advantage by white folks in that area to help keep them in those enslaved conditions. My family had to fight off the KKK, not only for their lives, but also for others in their community. it was often my family or their friends who were that strange fruit swinging from trees. Okay? We have had a specific heritage here in this country, and I think I applaud everyone who voted in favor of addressing those issues and addressing that reparations that needs to be given to those folks here. And I agree with everyone else. It is not the only reparations claim that needs to happen, but this one specifically is for us, and I will encourage and support others who bring their claims forward. But I'm happy that y'all have done this yesterday. Now it's time to get to the proposal work. That took up way too much time, way too much meetings. It's time to get back to work. Let's get it. Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Ms. DeWaite.
Next speaker is Marcus Champion. Mr. Champion, you've been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes to speak.
All right, can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir.
Good morning to everyone, first of all. First, I want to thank the task force members who stood tall in the face of obstruction, maintained the statute as it reads, and voted for a lineage standard. Thank you, Senator Bradford, Councilwoman Stepp. Thank you for your steadfastness and fire, Dr. Scott Lewis. Thank you for your always present wisdom, Vice Chair Brown. And thank you for being the utmost professional and leader we need in this moment, Madam Chair Moore. The issue I want to raise today is with the communications firms and their activity so far. I too was perplexed by the sudden last-minute meeting labeled as urgent in all capital letters. It was also curious to me why in the RSVP form a question was asked regarding eligibility, and this seemed like an out-of-order move. During this meeting, AV Partners and Young Communications proceeded to give out bad information, misrepresenting the number of listening sessions that have happened so far, how long the task force has been meeting, saying you have been meeting for 2 years when it hasn't been a year yet, and as also stated by Chair Moore, not only gave out an email address when asked for the DOJ task force website, but the wrong email at that. The meeting ended after 15 minutes. It was a frivolous meeting and a complete waste of time in the middle of a workday. I think a progress report of benchmarks achieved so far being good practice, as well as transparency to the public of what metrics the communications firms are tasked to hit for the duration of this task force. As I see it so far, we as citizens have been doing more to advertise and spread the word for this monumental reparations action, and none of us are being paid to do so. Transparency with the communications firms can foster trust, and they are obligated to provide us that as stakeholders. Finally, Assemblyman Jones Sawyer, the last 2 hearings we have witnessed you endeavor to obstruct the lineage standard clearly identified in this legislation that I can claim actual authorship on. We will remember this come election time. Thank you.
Mr. Champion.
Our next speaker is Chantel Bacon, I'm sorry. Chantel Bacon, you've been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you. I know sometime today we're going to speak on anti-Black, and so I just wanted to bring up a couple of things regarding that. So California becoming California after the Spanish-American War, and it was going to be a free state. But part of that, because the rest of the country in the South had already had 3/5 compromise, which is the clearest expression of constitutional structural racism, they had to prevent Black people from coming to their state. So the decades during that time, they forcibly removed Native Californians, which some were Black, and removed them from their lands, or also made them go into indentured servitude and forced them back to slavery somewhere else outside of California. And this can be this can be verified. Governor Pete Burnett at the time in 1851, he wanted to exterminate, but he could not exterminate the Blacks because technically we were citizens. So he forcibly removed them, and anyone that he could not remove, then he exterminated them under the Indian Removal Act. Even though California was founded as a free state, there were efforts, the California leaders and before its founders to ban Black people from moving to California or living in the state. The California passed its own fugitive slave law, which declared that any Black person who came to California as an enslaved person prior to California becoming a state was nonetheless to be considered legal property of that slaveholder. The fugitive slave law, which led to forced deportation, and they call it deportation, but it was not deportation because we didn't migrate here, but it was forced return back to the South into slavery. I also wanted to look at, because California had their anti-Blackness laws on the books when they passed the Rumford Fair Housing Act. I know you guys are going to get into that, so please look into the Fair Housing Rumford Act that was passed in 1963. Yesterday, I told you that my grandparents came here in the 1950s. So renting property, buying property was very challenging for them. Also, when you consider anti-Blackness, consider in 1963, Santa Monica Freeway in the city of Los Angeles was built through the center of Sugar Hill neighborhood, destroying dozens of mansions owned by African Americans. It was a thriving, predominantly Black community. Also, they had the Belmont Park area in Santa Monica, also Inkwell. I don't want to leave out our desert communities. John Nobles, please look up John Nobles. He had a thriving community, and the city of Indio basically demolished his town.
Ms. Bacon, I'm so sorry to cut you off in the middle of your sentence. Thank you so much for your comments this morning. All right, thank you. Trini, our next speaker.
Our next speaker will be Ann Reeves. Ann Reeves, you've been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes. Ann Reeves. Okay, we will move on to the next one for right now. Next speaker will be TAC. TAC, you have been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes to speak.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Task Force. My name is Dr. Tish Crawford. I want to thank you, and I'm a member of the California Black Lineage Society. I want to thank you once again, Chairman Moore and Vice President Chairman Brown, those members of the task force who voted for lineage-based reparation. Once again, Chairwoman Moore, Mr. Brown, Councilwoman Montgomery Steppe, Dr. Jovan Scott Lewis, and Senator Bradford, I want to thank you. I married into a Ghanaian family, and my challenge has always been with my Ghanaian family was not to be erased. My enslaved ancestors died on the killing field, and one of the things that I always state to them, I'm going to quote you, Booker T. Washington, my family cast their bucket here in the United States, and this is where we lay, and this is where we will die. I want to let you know that I want to thank you once again for not erasing my ancestors. Representation is so important, and those who voted for lineage-based reparations know that. I want to thank Dr. Jovan Scott Lewis. You truly articulated yesterday so well. You are truly an ally that was not and has not been weaponized against the descendants of the enslaved. It's sad to say, but there's this old quote, just because you're skin folk don't make you kinfolk. And I want to truly say thank you, Jovan Scott Lewis. You are definitely kinfolk. I want to thank you for your clarity, your logic, along with Chairman Moore and her steadfastness to truly keep the task force on task and the purity of what the bill is and the purpose of the task force. I also want to let you guys know, as you move forward, the most important task now is to ensure those who are unable to locate their ancestors have the means, the money, and accessibility paid by the state of California to make sure that they're able to get those documents to get what they deserve. I want to thank you once again for not erasing me. And I'm going to say that And I want to thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Our next speaker is going to be Quanta. Quanta, you've been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes to speak.
All right. I want to say thank you to all that voted in favor of lineage-based reparations. Javon Lewis, thank you. This is really showing that all the diaspora is not against us getting our justice claim. A lot of you guys are with us, and we have been having you guys on Twitter saying, hey, we're here with you. I even had my ex-husband, who is Chinese American, call me from Hawaii and said, I'm standing with y'all. And it made me feel good because a lot of non-foundational Black Americans and those who not even share our struggle, period, don't really care, don't mind sabotaging our justice claim like we're dogs or something, and don't mind taking it away and laughing at us like Sawyer did yesterday, thinking it was funny. I moved back home to Missouri a couple of years ago from Hawaii to come back to be with my family as well. I'm glad I did. Stephen Bradford, thank you. We need you to stand in this gap. Not only you, it's more of our lineage, our folks that carry the same lineage. We need you guys. We're getting stumped for nothing. We have not did anything wrong but stand up and say, hey, this is who we are. We coming to get our check, like Martin said. We coming to get our justice claim, like Martin said. And then to see the people that carry our lineage, like, I'm sorry, I'm worried about how they feel. What do you mean? I'm telling you, we're dying. I'm telling you, our wealth is under those who come here yesterday. With what they say, with two quarters. How is it that they came here with 2 quarters? In the same day, supposedly, they got a house, car, loans, grants, and we're begging. We're begging them to give us the same thing. You know what they told me? Ma'am, you can get a signature loan for $300. We're not afforded the same things that others are afforded, and we built this place. They disrespect us so bad for nothing. We have not did anything wrong. And then they call us divisive for standing up for ourselves. I'm not divisive when I'm ready to fight for non-FBA, for immigrants. I'm at the border telling my heck, yeah, who wants to see somebody harm or die? I'm with the Jamaicans and the diaspora and everything else. We're ready to ride. We always been riders. Foundational Americans always been riders. But when it's time to ride for us, it's like, yeah, let me out the car. What do you mean let you out the car? But anyway, I'm not going to go into all that. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. And Tamaki, come on now. We're going to need a little bit more action from you now.
Miss Quanta?
There you go again, Ms. Walton. Okay, I know. I'm out of here. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. Thank you guys.
Thanks for your comments.
Our next speaker will be, I'm going to try Connie Collins right now. She, hopefully we've resolved her technical difficulties. Connie Collins, you've been unmuted. You have 3 minutes to speak. Ms. Collins? Okay. The next speaker will be Cleve Mollett. You've been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes to speak.
Okay, thank you for hearing me today. I'll be brief, and I ask that you bear with me because of past meetings. First, as to lineage-based reparations, I hope that you guys will consider the fact that our ancestors had no hand in creating or maintaining the documents. So just sort of give that consideration as we go forward. But I want to provide input on the form, the length, and the amount of reparations. I think that the form should be not just education, not just medical, but should cover everything, including cash. We shouldn't be forced to accept education only, then have to go out and earn money to repair the other medical and legal portions. And so I think it should be cash, everything, all the way across the board. Our ancestors had everything taken from them. Therefore, to fully repair everything, we need reparations to include everything. Also, reparations should be tax-free. Our ancestors did not have representation, and there's no taxation without representation. Therefore, reparations should be tax-free. And I also ask that you protect reparations from current day liabilities like, back rent from COVID-19 and that sort of thing. So just sort of consider that. Next, I want to talk about the length. You can't repair hundreds of years of disenfranchisement with 4 years of anything. So I think that reparations must continue for each person. And just like it happened for white people, when their benefits were passed down, their money was passed down to their children. When a person dies under reparations, their benefits should continue and be passed on to their children or anyone they appoint. Okay, so I ask that you consider that. Next is the amount. The amounts can be monthly or annually, and if the cash portion should be above poverty level, in my opinion. And it should also be based on what it takes to survive today, not based on what it would have been worth back during slavery, because if we base it on what the amount was back then, we lose all of those years to grow our money. We won't have the benefit of any interest that we could gain over 400 years. So it has to be based on today's prices. And that is all I had. I said I would be brief, and thank you for hearing me.
Thank you, Mr. Millett. Trini, let's do a check-in. Chair Moore, it looks like it's 9:56. If we are ending at 10:05, then that's about maybe 2 people. Trini, how many people do we have in the queue?
Right now we have 2 people.
Chair Moore? We'll just take those 2? Is that fine? Yes. Okay.
We have several more waiting, but we have 2 people moved over that are ready.
All right.
Our next speaker will be Ernest. Ernest, you've been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes to speak.
Yep. Good morning, task force members. My name is Ernest Russell, and like I've said over previous calls, I want to commend you guys for the efforts that you have put in so far as it relates to the Black American Justice Claim. Yesterday, I think we see what it will take to truly change America or to change this nation, and that's going to require that people who are advocating in the interests of the descendant of slave community, they would need to take steps that are bold and are not just a repeat of what we've seen over the last 60 to 80 years when we look at the failures of the civil rights movement. And so I did want to commend you all to let you know that by you passing the lineage standards, you took steps that kind of built upon what was laid out by the radical Republicans when they sought to create an actual America that was equal. And, I feel like, with you guys defining eligibility, you can now take the other steps that are going to be needed to ensure that we can secure prosperity and progress and even repair for the actual descendant community that was harmed. And so, with that being said, I did want to also, request that the task force consider the testimony given by our economists as it relates to some of the compensation proposals that are going to be proposed. I think, again, we'll see a lot of challenges there. There may be this heavy need or reliance upon education, but as to what one of the earlier speakers said, education doesn't always provide you employment security. And so you definitely navigating through those remedies, I would say, is going to be one of the next difficult tasks. But outside of that, my last comments is going to be related to affirmative action. As we've seen, affirmative action was a program initially designed for Black Americans to address the historical wrongs of slavery. But what happened was it became a program for all minorities. And that ultimately was at the detriment for Black Americans, because as we fast forward 80 years, we can see that affirmative action is now being challenged by the very minorities who were given access to it. And then in addition, it has also benefited white women at a disproportionate rate. Now, with that being the case, you guys, as you're, crafting proposals and future policies or recommendations for what those policies should look like, I would just, urge you guys to review what occurred during the affirmative action, I guess the initial hearings related to that, and then also, continue to be bold as you move forward. And with that, I'll say peace, love, and reparations.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. All right, we will turn to our last speaker of the morning. Trini?
Our last speaker today will be Callie. You've been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes to speak.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, yeah. Good day. My name is Osric Pratt, founder of OPP Presents LLC here in California, as well as campaign manager for U.S. congressional candidate Greg Marcel Dixon, and the grandson-in-law of the first Black freedman police chief in the history of L.A. County. Now, I'm born and raised in Northern California and a descendant of American freedmen from the Eskridge and Pratt Plantation in Mississippi and the Tate Plantation in Alabama. The Tate family owned the biggest plantation in central and northern Alabama, in particular Wilcox County. Their family archives are documented in the Auburn University Library. Another point of reference is Geronimo Pratt, Tupac's godfather. Our ancestors are from the same plantation. So with that said, we are truly happy there was a resolution yesterday that supported the author's intention and focus for lineage-based descendants of slaves in America. And we know the fight is not over, but the people have recognized leadership in this group. Attorney Moore, God bless you, as God has anointed you with the leadership in this journey. Dr. Lewis, love is kind, love is patient, love rejoices with the truth. You exemplified those words of God and showed true leadership. I salute you. Dr. Brown, thank you for calming the chaos. Your wisdom continuously sets the tone. Thank you for your leadership. Bradford and Montgomery, thank you. Today's a new day, and through this leadership, we can begin to repair Black America to fix America through the leadership of freedmen. That is U.S. congressional candidate Greg Marcel Dixon's slogan as he journeys into Congress with this legislation. MarcelForCongress.com. Peace and love to the freedmen. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pratt, and thank you, all the commenters.
Wait, so there's still time for one more because it's
Okay.
10:02 and the period ends at 10:05.
Fine. Sounds good. Trini, can you promote one more person? Let's hear. Trini?
Yes, I'm waiting for them to click continue.
Okay.
Whoever clicks first will be the last speaker.
Okay.
The last speaker is LaDonna. LaDonna, you have been unmuted. You now have 3 minutes to speak.
Yes, good morning, task force. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, good morning. First of all, I want to say, please, moving forward, can you get an effective webinar system where there is effective communication? We constantly had to deal with the blips and the computer sounds and being knocked off the system, not only through trying to engage effectively with you on this, but as a previous speaker mentioned, the lack of communication and engagement on the community boots ground level, where many of us miss those very important meetings and opportunities to engage. I believe Chair Moore mentioned somewhere close to $1 million being spent on that. Please find a new system. This had been such a hair-pulling experience just to even hear you all clearly. But I want to say thank you, thank you, thank you on behalf of my ancestors who were literally bought and sold, and we have receipts to show how they were mistreated, treated as less than humans. The vote that you took yesterday have restored that faith in us that we have a new day coming and we are due our fair share. I want to go through each one, but we only have 3 minutes to just get all this out. But I want to say, Dr. Jovan, you are in our area. You operated like a quiet assassin, and we love you. You are truly an ally that you could share and teach Mr. Tamaki what it means to be a real ally for those who have been harmed. Ms. Moore, thank you for holding it down while our elder tried to bully you, and you held your ground. Thank you, thank you. Senator Bradford, I watched you through the CARB, California Air Resources Board process. You came in there like a warrior for the unheard, for the disadvantaged communities whose resources in the millions have been taken right from under them. You came in and called out that agency as poverty pimps. At one point, you made me really question your commitment to the disadvantaged, which is our lineage. That's where we're starting. But at the end, you voted in the right way, and you showed that you are that warrior, although we're going to hold you accountable. For Grills and Holder and Tamaki, I ask that you remove yourself from this process because I have no confidence at all that you will do the right thing. I feel like the other caller, that you will sabotage this process. Let those come in who are committed to righting the wrongs that have happened to our people. My ancestors who were from Virginia, from Oklahoma, from Texas, that had to literally run for their lives and get to California only to be further discriminated against, I know for a fact they are turning over in their grave, although I actually believe in the resurrection. But these processes here have literally forced us into a depressive mood, watching us being sabotaged by our own through these processes. So we're asking, as we move through this, money should be at the top of the list.
Ms. LaDonna?
No other interests who have
Ms.
had...
LaDonna, I'm so sorry to cut you off. Thank you so much for all of your comments this morning. We appreciate the fact that you came out and made comments. Thank you and have a great day. All right. Hear more. That concludes the public comments today. Thank you, everyone. We've reached the allotted time. And if you are not able to provide public comment, we invite you to attend future meetings or submit written comments or testimony via email, again at reparationstaskforce@doj.ca.gov. I'll now turn it back over to Chair Moore, and thank you, Trini.
Thank you. So we'll now turn to agenda item 15, which was a former agenda item number 11. But before we do that, I want to turn to Damon, who will talk about the modified agenda.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If DOJ staff could put up the modified agenda. Good morning, members of the task force. Yesterday, pursuant to your request, we continued item number 11, which was the discussion of scope of work, to the first item of business this morning. And so you'll see that that is the next agenda item that we will transition to. Thankfully, we were able to get the availability of the experts who are able to accommodate this change. And so we will spend the next 2 hours having that discussion. That will be followed by the criminal justice system panel. Unfortunately, we had to dig into your lunch period in order to try to keep things within the day's time frame. So at some point, as Dr. Grills mentioned yesterday, you may have to grab a snack to continue to proceed through the agenda. That will be followed, if you could scroll down just a little bit, that'll be followed by a short break. Panel 2 will be next on anti-Black bias and hate crimes. That panel is about an hour after it was originally scheduled, and we've reached out to the panelists to let them know of the changed times. And then the final panel, which is about 30 minutes off schedule, will be the last panel on the history of policing and the war on drugs. At the conclusion of those 3 panels, we will continue with the agenda as previously noticed, with the unfinished business, the future meetings schedule, and during that time, you can take up some of the items that were tabled from yesterday. So I just wanted to preview that for you today. We are scheduled to end at 5:30 as opposed to 5 o'clock. And that is how we'll proceed. Madam Chair, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much. So the next item on the agenda is agenda item number 15, former agenda item number 11, potential action item, discussion on the scope of work. The task force will discuss the scope of work and provide guidance to the witnesses. So at this time, is the economic consultant team available and ready to present?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Hi, Professor Campbell. You may begin when you're ready.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Will the presentation pop up, or do I share my screen? How does it work?
The DOJ should be able to assist. Can the DOJ share the presentation on their end or assist her in how to share her screen?
We'll put up the materials just momentarily.
Thank you.
My apologies, but I do not have a presentation for this panel. Ms. Campbell, if you can share your screen, it's there should be some sharing options on the right-hand side of your screen.
Got it, not a problem. Not the most intuitive.
If you share just the window, stop sharing, and then go back, open your presentation in the presentation mode. And then if you Alt-Tab back to BlueJeans, you can share just the window, and it won't show your entire desktop.
Is everybody seeing the presentation?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for helping with, I'm trying to unzoom myself. Okay, all right. Again, we want to thank the task force for allowing this group to be able to present some of the findings and to kind of give a framework so that we can begin a discussion on what exactly is required for the scope of work. I will preface what we're about to say by alluding to the fact that last night's vote will affect some of the models and the calculations and the schemas that we kind of present here, and will affect some of what we will do moving forward based on the framework that the task force will give us some directions on. The members of the task force are listed here: Casey Campbell, Thomas Kramer, William Dardy, Kirsten Mullen, and William Spriggs. What you see here is what we have collectively come up with, having met and determined that this was one way we wanted to begin some of the discussions as we watch the proceedings related to this very important work. The first thing is, when we met and we had our initial discussion, we had two frameworks that we identified as the expert group. And we wanted to outline these two frameworks and provide some issues and some conditions and some calculations to begin the discussion associated with what is required for the calculations of reparations based on what the task force will give us directions on to pursue. The first model that we discussed at length, we're calling the National Reparations Framework. And I'll kind of go through what exactly this is, but this particular framework is, more often than not, when people hear reparations, this is usually what comes to mind in terms of a national reparations framework. Now, there's one particular caveat that all of us agree on with our meeting, is even though we are presenting this national reparations framework, the group itself, the economist group, that the members that we just outlined, are stating here that financial calculations based on this national model, where we partition reparations and calculations state by state, we know this is not methodologically sound. So even though we will present this because it helps to inform decisions and it begins a discussion, we wanted to kind of state that. Now, what exactly this national reparations framework? In a nutshell, it pretty much identifies an aggrieved population that merits compensation, and then there is a calculation that's done, and then it's divided across this eligible population. And oftentimes it's operationalized as the elimination of the wealth gap. What we have done here is a rough estimate based on the latest data to give you an idea of, on a very broad, big framework, what this would look like in terms of operational elements. The elimination of the wage gap, you see it stated here, household wealth for white families and is $983,400. For Black families, it's $142,500, which is producing a gap of almost $850,000. That's what we calculate as the gap. And this is really a snapshot in time of the disparity in wealth across these groups. And when we say snapshot, we want it to be clear that we know, and all of us know, that discrimination is continuous and plays over a life cycle of generations. But if at a particular point in time we wanted to get a sense of the racial wealth gap, this is what we would do to operationalize that. Now, the national frameworks model, if we were to go on this calculation, the idea is, given this wealth gap, this racial wealth gap, the difference between them based on Black and white household sits at approximately $336,000 based on the calculations of what we know to be the persons in a white household and the person in a Black household. So, snapshot in time, racial wealth gap is sitting at $336,000 based on the recent numbers. And this is what's operationalized in terms of an elimination of the racial wealth gap. I don't know if any of the other economist group want to chime in or add anything. Feel free to do so. as I kind of go through any of this.
Yeah, so this is a national estimate of the disparity in wealth between Black and white American individuals. And so that estimate is in the vicinity of $350,000 or so. And in the calculation that we generate for the minimal amount of a reparations plan at the national level, we multiply that $350,000 figure by the population that's eligible to receive it to come up with a total. And I believe in a moment, Dr. Campbell will show that I think that the threshold minimum estimate at the national level will be $14 trillion. What we're attempting to do is to indicate why that is not a figure that can be met at the state level or the local level or all states and localities combined, in large part because their budgets won't facilitate it. I think we estimate that the total budgets for all state and local governments throughout the United States is approximately $3.5 trillion, which is far less than the $14 trillion minimum that would be required. And so I just want to insert that into the conversation. Dr. Campbell.
Thank you.
But to be clear, it's not an issue simply of the feasibility, because of course we're talking about wealth, and the state could transfer wealth for that amount. So the budgets are different than the state's capability of granting wealth, depending upon how you want it, reparations. But this is based on the fact that because of anti-miscegenation laws, roughly speaking, you have a very well-defined population at 1865. We know the wealth gap from then to whatever year you want to choose, 2020, 2022. And we can presume that the totality of all actions of omission and commission that prevented an equal accumulation of income that then would turn into an equal accumulation of wealth, that is what this is measuring. And it's not possible to petition this to individual states because the model is saying, given that Black people moved in many different states and lived in many different states during parts of their lives, this is an average spread across all African Americans from 1865 forward, despite all the different states they live in. To petition it by state becomes impossible because we don't have a model that can incorporate movements of people and understanding what actions, inactions, what commissions of sins can be petitioned and how we would trace those. And further to the point, there isn't a way for us to come up with calculations at a state level for the wealth gap because of this movement of people. So even if we said, what was the wealth of Black people in California in 1855 when it became a state, what is the wealth of Black people today? Those clearly aren't the same people. And so we don't have a way of tracing the wealth of those people present in 1855 to those who are in California today, or for any individual state for that matter.
Just briefly, I think Dr. Spriggs means 1850.
1850 when it was a state.
Perfect. To kind of help with some of the calculations that have been outlined there, some of those figures in terms of roughly 336, 350 racial wealth gap. If we take the Black population in California of 2.6 million, we're looking at times the 336, we see a bill for reparations using this model would close the gap at 873.6 billion if we use the 2.6, and if we take a conservative estimate of about 2 million, where we're focusing on ancestors who were enslaved, then we see that estimate sitting at 672 billion. Just to contextualize what these calculations would mean within this particular framework, which is what we kind of wanted to highlight here, along with the migration issue that Professor Spriggs just kind of outlined. So that's the national reparations framework, and at a very high level, what the process requires in terms of calculations and the elimination of the racial wealth gap and particular issues with calculation and its use at the state level is what we wanted to highlight here. We wanted to also kind of highlight what I said before earlier, that the estimate so far is only up to a specific time with this particular model. And even though the model itself captures opportunities or losses linked to enslavement, so we talk about an individual stripped of their resources that could be productive within society, stripped of their labor, stripped of their ability to accumulate wealth through rent and capital and profits. This model captures that very well, but its applicability at the state level would have problems in terms of what we outlined with issues associated with migration and using those estimates for the calculation of reparations.
There are two points that are related to this. The first is that the national strategy of attempting to eliminate the racial wealth gap is something that is not replicable at the state level, given the resources that the state of California currently possesses. And so that's the first issue, and that's an issue of incapacity to meet the bill. The second issue is the one that Dr. Spriggs raised, which is the conditions of racial wealth inequality in the state of California today are not exclusively a consequence of a chain of events that took place solely in the state of California. And this is one of the big issues that we've had to struggle with, which is the question of what are the relevant range of atrocities that are specific to the state of California that need to be addressed in any process of atonement or compensation.
Which segues perfectly into model number 2 that we're referring to as the state-specific harms, or we call it the atrocities framework. And the task force, of course, will give us some direction and tell us what areas to pursue so that we could use this framework to figure out a procedure, to have calculations that would allow us to identify specific atrocities or harms for which California should compensate. To give you an idea of what the economist group met and looked at, the idea here is, based on what Dr. Darty just outlined, we would, from the input of the task force and with direction of the task force, look at a list of harms that would be prioritized to be linked with some specificity to California. And what we have here are just some categories that the task force can start to think about. This list is in no way finite. It can be expanded, it can be shrunk, but we wanted to give an idea of these particular buckets, these particular atrocities, as they're identified, and the task force directs us as to what we should be looking at. We would have under each of these particular categories calculations associated with reparations, calculations associated with harms and atrocities that are specific to California. Just to give you an idea, we have categories such as unjust property takings by eminent domain, intellectual property deprivation, houselessness, unwarranted police violence, segregated education, non-representative estate commissions, housing discrimination, labor discrimination, environmental harm, mass incarceration and sentencing, health harms, transgenerational effects, and other related potential harms. Just to give you an idea of these particular atrocities, we would present calculations under each of these categories that will provide a link to a total calculations of reparations based on the population that is identified and these lists of atrocities or harms within this particular framework. Did I capture everything from the group? Again, feel free to pop in.
I think we mean not necessarily a total calculation, but that the task force would have a threshold that they would declare this action warrants compensation. And we would let you know what our best calculation would be for that. And then the task force would lay out how would the claimants present themselves to get the compensation. So if I had been imprisoned and the task force determined, this is the task force determined that in fact mass incarceration was an act with animus towards people who were the descendants of slaves, then if I had been incarcerated, here is how I would file to be compensated. And the task force would lay out the process by which I would file, and we would have provided for that task force what the compensation would be.
We will need from the task force a tremendous amount of advice and guidance about which of these types of harms genuinely are specific to California. We certainly are under the impression that when you start talking about the use of eminent domain practices to unjustly seize people's property, that's something that is very specific to California. On the other hand, if we're talking about discrimination in housing markets that might be linked to the practices of redlining, redlining was a national policy that was a consequence of a public-private partnership between the Federal Housing Administration and local banks. That took place all across the country. And so it becomes somewhat difficult to determine to what extent that is something that was specific to California. And then, of course, we don't actually say much about slavery and enslavement. Our focus is on the period after slavery ends, in large measure because the practice of slavery took place on a national scale and on a more extensive scale in many states, particularly in the southern part of the United States, than it took place in California. And so, again, the issue of the specificity of the harm to California is really critical from our perspective in pursuing this second approach.
And remember, people who were enslaved in California were enslaved by first Spain and then by Mexico. And you'd have to clarify your terms because currently you're saying that people only get compensated for being enslaved by the United States, which means from 1789 when our Constitution was ratified. If you mean people in compensation before then it appears, and this is the part that my colleague at Howard, Greg Carr, was raising, when there was no United States, then it appears you are arguing for those who were enslaved by the British in those places that became the United States. If you start to get into an argument about compensating people who were enslaved by Spain, then you're getting afield from what you appear to have agreed to.
So I think Dr. Spriggs is referring to enslaved people who were present in California before 1850. Totally.
Yeah, and our assumption is that well, we don't know. I mean, the task force will have to tell us, but we have been assuming that 1850 is essentially the start date for considering any of these atrocities that are relevant to compensation by the state of California.
I have a question, if I could, or I could wait until the end. Okay, I think I addressed this in our advisory committee meeting, but for instance, one of the first people we heard from to give testimony was Jonathan Burgess, and his great-great-grandfather first came to California from New Orleans in 1849, and he was initially brought to California as a slave to mine for gold. So I think I asked this in our advisory committee, like how, if at all, are we accounting for people like Burgess, if they can find that they were actually, their ancestors were enslaved in California? Would there be a distinction between those who were enslaved in California versus other states? I just kind of wanted to put that out into the ether as something I'm still wrestling with, but I think maybe because he first came in 1849 and not 1850, then that's out of the scope. Is that what I'm hearing you're saying?
The task force can set whichever scope you wish.
Right.
But the challenge is one of what are you saying? Is the current state of California responsible for things that did not happen in California or that California had a role in? Is something you, as the task force, must define.
Yeah, and that's part of the framing questions when it comes to figuring out the scope of work. That time period allotment will come from the task force. Residency requirements, again, is direction from the task force. The years of determining the beginning of harm, different starting points associated with different atrocity categories are framing questions that have to come from the task force. And the last one with last night's vote kind of gives us some direction. So the particular, what we need as the economist group in terms of how we proceed with calculations, the input into the models for time periods and residency requirements and what categories and so on will come directly from the task force. One thing that we pointed out, given the difference with model number 2, the atrocities framework, one thing that we discussed was an idea of how to operationalize this in California. And one approach that we talked about was having a reparations tribunal. And I heard some of the testimony yesterday that kind of hinted at some sort of office or entity that helps to individuals to identify claims and claimants. There are individuals who might not know they have a right to a claim or might not know how to, or to even notify claimants of a right to a claim based on harms or atrocities, or provide research and advice and paperwork, and to give timelines and approval and requirements so that the process can be operationalized was something that we kind of discussed in our meetings initially. But as it relates to what we need, those very important inputs that you, especially like what you just brought up, Chair Moore, are inputs that would come directly from the task force.
So, for instance, if we were talking about a specific highway that went through a Black neighborhood, then we envision that the task force could recommend that there be an office that would help me in identifying that, yes, my parents owned a home in the path of that highway. Yes, my parents lost their home. Now, then the task force has to make an additional set of decisions. California's lost Black population. Does that mean that if, as a result of losing our home, our family subsequently moved from California, is the task force going to allow people who have moved to be compensated? Or must I have remained in California? If the task force agrees that there needs to be a reparations tribunal over mass incarceration, same question. Can I document can you help me document when I was incarcerated, the years I was incarcerated? Can I have access to the benefits that are calculated that I should have received? And again, suppose I moved from California. Am I entitled to be repaired, made whole by the state of California for something California did, even though I no longer live in California?
Right? These are fundamental problems that arise with state level, quote unquote, reparations, which is, doesn't make your task easy. But that's the assignment.
I would add there are data issues involved here. For much of what we would want to do, as an example, if you wanted us as economists to say, well, we want economic evidence to add to our evidentiary evidence when it comes to what's the calculation for the harm done, let's say by mass incarceration. Are you asking us to find data that can separate those who are mass incarcerated who are only descendants of slaves from other Black people? And if we estimate what was the harm done for Blacks of being mass incarcerated, you want us to come up with a calculation that would compare only the descendants of slaves to other people being the other group. In which case, you understand we would be including some Black people who are mass incarcerated as not being harmed. And therefore, we would be diminishing, we would be diluting a comparison between a racial effect from an animus effect aimed only at the descendants of slaves. These are the kind of things you have to tell us how we would calculate it. And the availability of data by ancestry is not something that is common. It is easy for us to get information on the income of Black people. It is easy for us to get information on the income of Black people on the basis of whether they're immigrants, but that's separate from the second generation is going to show up as having been born in America. So that's separate from the ancestry issue. There are going to be a lot of people who will show up as being Black in the data that we have access to, but we won't be able to identify them as a problem. So we need direction. We would need direction from you on that.
Well, I believe the state has just passed a law that folks refer to as one that would disaggregate not only the Black population, but also other highly aggregated groups like Hispanics or Asians. So it may be part and parcel of the process here to have the state administer additional surveys or a new survey that would provide the kind of information that you're saying we don't currently have.
Right. So the task force needs to understand there would be need for additional data. As far as I know, Professor Garrity's data he did on wealth differences for one city in California is the only one where we can do that. If we were to pursue an issue of wealth inequality generated by all of the acts of discrimination or commission or omission, but you'd have to commission another more complete survey, which we don't have access to, in order to come up with a justifiable methodology for that gap.
Yeah, you mentioned the state, the disaggregation. That's among racial groups. So whether you're Chinese, Korean, Vietnamese, Southeast Asian, that's much simpler to do than trying to figure out, I don't want to call it a job, but whether or not you were on a slave plantation. And I don't think the state, it's much easier for the state to disaggregate that data on ethnicity than it is for what we're asking for, which I think was mentioned yesterday, just the challenges of that. And so my question is more of, do we need to figure that out or figure out how to implement that before we can even talk to you, because you need specific numbers, or is this going to be problematic, or is this something we can work on and then maybe make some changes later on to further get you to a place where the committee is comfortable? It's almost like, which comes first, the chicken or the eggs? I mean, what would you need? Can you just start your work with the limited?
Yes, it means more work for us.
Made an assumption that only, again, don't hold me to this, that only out of the 2.6 million, only 30% are descendants of slaves. And then you could start with that. And if it grows over time, as we get more information, you could expand it. Is that one way to do it?
So
or
actually,
the
numbers we're using have 70% of Black Californians as descendants of persons enslaved in the U.S. We can do an analysis. It means more work for us. We can do an analysis where we generate a set of numbers that are contingent on different criteria for whom is eligible. And so we could give you numbers that are associated with different totals of the eligible population. That's something that we can potentially do. It's more work for us. But from the standpoint of getting the information, we already have survey instruments that are well designed that permit us to get information about individuals' ancestry and about the number of years that they have been in the United States, whether or not their parents were immigrants to the United States. This is something that we could potentially learn depending upon whether or not this is something that the task force recommends to the assembly.
But remember, I mean, and we have the current census results, which have that kind of information, but this depends on what your model is, what you're asking us to do. If you take the approach that the task force will come up with, at the end of the day, either a procedure by which there would be a tribunal and the task force wants to set a bar. So let's say that you spend the rest of your time saying, we're going to establish a set of rules. If an act of California created an X% gap in black, white wealth, then we will have a study, we will have a reparations tribunal, and people who suffered that injustice will come before the tribunal to get compensated. If that's the approach you take, then we can estimate a model to try and understand, for instance, what effect did redlining have on black-white differences in home ownership. As I mentioned, we could differentiate that, but understand that the potential pollution, that if we said we're only going to look at the disparity for descendants compared to everybody else, then everybody else includes some people who may have been harmed equally, because the animus may not have been against being the descendant of slaves, but against being black. So if there were banks that were practicing discrimination in lending, if there were realtors who were practicing discrimination and selling homes, and we estimate what we believe to be the impact of redlining to people today on their wealth, then, again, we need your direction. Do you want this smaller estimate because it will include people who may have been the subject of racial animus, opposed to simple animus against the descendants of slaves? And whether you take our advice that we not be asked to try and do the national reparations model, that will be equally as important. The national model, meaning, take a point in time, 1865. We know that because of anti-miscegenation laws, there's very little overlap. There is overlap, but very little overlap between the black and white population. We know what the wealth is of white people at the end. We know what the wealth of black people is at the end. Black people moved all around, white people moved all around, but all within the same confines of the United States. And we can do a calculation nationally. We're saying to you, we don't believe that would be a good approach, because it's not possible to disentangle that model by state, to petition the argument, the underlying argument of that model, to decompose it by state, because it just doesn't decompose.
I wish we had had this conversation yesterday before we had that inane conversation we had yesterday, because this puts a whole nother light on all of this. I mean, you put a financial light on this that is that gives us more to do as a committee. So I thank you for that. It gives us more to think about, and I think the more information we get, the complexity of this becomes truly difficult. So I want to thank the economists, because now I got another set of things, another set of tools we can do to make sure we can do our best at mitigating the harm, which is what we're all striving to do.
Dr. Kramer, did you have any comments? I haven't heard from you.
Yeah, earlier I meant to jump in when you mentioned the redlining discrimination as a federal policy, which is true, it was, but the federal law was designed on purpose to be to give very great discretion to the states. So in fact, the redlining did become a state responsibility. So I think we can take redlining into consideration as a state-specific injustice. And I also think we can calculate both models, the national one and the state specific one, and give our recommendation which one is more methodologically sound. But this could also give California an incentive to set some money aside for lobbying for federal reparations, because ultimately this is what slavery reparations definitely would require, a federal policy.
Thank you. I actually agree with you, Professor Kramer, on the redlining piece and on the piece about the federal reparations effort, because that's in the statute as well that was written in by grassroots activists, that whatever comes out of the state reparations task force does not preclude federal responsibility for a national effort. So that's definitely in alignment with the statute. I just wanted to clarify, I'm glad that Professor Spriggs brought up the 2020 census, because that's the first census in history which allowed people to write in who or how they want to identify. So, you know, I know that's probably limited in its efficacy, but it's definitely better than past practices. And then I just wanted to clarify in terms of the data disaggregation bills in California. I think the bill that Dr. Darity was referring to was AB 1604. In AB 1604, it hasn't passed the state legislature, but it did pass the Judiciary Committee. And the sponsor of that is Chris Holden, Assemblymember Chris Holden. And it really applies to state boards and commissions, but it eventually will probably be extrapolated, I think is the theory. And in AB 1604, it requires the disaggregation of data amongst Black and African racial groups. So it'll be disaggregated amongst, you know, African Americans who descend from chattel slavery in the United States, West Indians and Caribbeans, and then, you know, West Africans, East Africans. So there's a bill already going through the California legislature, just passed the Judiciary Committee, that would disaggregate the data, particularly amongst Black and African racial groups, sponsored by Assemblymember Chris Holden. And so maybe that is something that as a task force we could support, because it seems like that type of data would help us in this effort.
Thank you.
Member Jones Sawyer.
So I point of clarification, I will ask Assemblymember Chris Holden, because I do believe it does not disaggregate by descendants of slaves. If it doesn't, maybe we can suggest that we put that in there so that we can maybe even start getting, or having the state start to get that information. So I will personally have a one-on-one conversation with the author of the disaggregation bill so that he can maybe help us with our efforts.
This is Lisa Holder. I have my hand raised. I have a question for Dr. Spriggs. I wanted to follow up on the analysis that you gave about, you know, the lack of disaggregated data that we have now. So in terms of the status quo data, there's an absence of data disaggregated by lineage. My question for you then is, I was trying to unpack what you were saying, using what the analytical frameworks that you have available as a regression analysis or whatever you use, is there a methodologically sound means for disaggregating between just a harm-based and a lineage-based when we're talking about atrocities like the atrocities that we see in housing, etc.? Is there a methodologically sound way to do that analysis?
We could take that 2020 census and look at issues of home ownership between people who are descendants of slaves on the basis of, did they identify in the question mark about their national lineage, which was separate from the race question. And we could treat the Black descendants of slaves compared to everyone else as the pattern of redlining comport with differences we see today in home ownership rates. And the issue would be, you could then test, okay, does my measure differ between the Black descendant of slaves and between Black people, whether they're descendants of slaves or not? You could test that hypothesis. Are those significantly different? There are going to be issues because you're making the sample size much smaller, because the non-descendants of slaves will be a smaller population. You may have issues that arise because we won't be able to measure that with precision because the sample size will be smaller. And we may end up concluding that we can't say with certainty that there's a difference for those people only because their sample size is small. We could say that the sign is in the right direction, the magnitude looks similar. We could end up with, we get greater precision because the sample size is going to be much bigger, right? Now if you tell me just do Black people, stop with dividing, just do Black people, it's a bigger sample size. And I may measure the gap with greater precision. When I do this, though, right, remember that I would be comparing the experience of African descendants of slaves to everybody else. And if the animus was, in fact, the realtors and the bankers and all were conspiring because someone was Black, then I'm going to be including people in the everybody else who face the same discrimination, and therefore my estimate is going to be smaller than it would be. And we could report that to you. We could report, look, you know, if you do this as Black, this is a really big effect. If we do it as only African descendants, it's slightly smaller. We may not be able to say that there's any significance because the sample size is going to be very small for the people who aren't the descendants of slaves.
I think there's
and that may be what I'll come back to you with.
There's a subtle issue here, though, because I believe that what the task force approved yesterday was not a criteria for eligibility that exclusively involved Black Americans whose ancestors were enslaved in the United States, but also included the descendants of free Blacks who were present in California prior to 1900. And so the distinction that you're drawing, Bill, is perhaps not really relevant to this conversation insofar as the more recent immigrant population is largely a community that has come to the United States after the 1960s.
I agree, yeah.
Right, yes, but if you ask me to measure what's the penalty, what is the legacy of redlining? And we know, we have studies that point to the redlining has current and persistent effects on current home ownership. You're going to have included in that people who have come here since 1960. And so if you ask me
about looking at the effects on the current population, okay.
Yeah. So if you ask me, estimate for the current population in California, what is the legacy of this impact that we are enduring today because of those decisions that were made in the 1940s? And we know that there are lasting and enduring effects for people living today, buying homes today.
Yeah, my argument is that the more recent immigrant population was not subjected to redlining.
Well, they weren't, but what I'm saying is we know that the reason they are present today is because the legacy of that redlining is still present in the patterns of housing discrimination we see. The patterns of residential housing segregation we know are informed by those red lines from before.